It was a warm evening in St. James's Square, and the opulent lights from the ball spilled out into the quiet street. Inside Badenoch House, society's elite were gathered for what should have been a night of celebration. The engagement of the Honourable Patricia Nugent to Thomas Chetwynd, a young man with a promising future. The Artie Squires band played softly, and laughter filled the grand ballroom. But in an upstairs room, death had cast a long shadow. Douglas Westray, son of the eminent aircraft manufacturer Sir Stanley Westray, had been found dead, a single gunshot to the head. The door to the room had been bolted from the inside, and all signs pointed to a suicide. A gun lay near his hand, and his face was ghostly pale as he sat slumped in the chair, the sound of the music from below seeming a world away. For most, it was an open and shut case. After all, Westray had been under considerable strain. 2 failed engagements, the recent loss of a prestigious aviation prize that should have gone to his family's firm, and rumours that he was deep in debt. But not everyone was convinced. Freddy Pilkington-Soames, a reporter with a keen eye for trouble and an instinct that wouldn't let go, was not so easily satisfied by appearances. It started with something simple, something off that didn't sit right with him. Why was Douglas wearing the wrong shoes? They weren't the shoes he had been seen wearing earlier that evening. And why was there no note? No final words to explain why a young man in his prime would take his own life at a glittering society ball. Freddy couldn't shake the feeling that something darker was at play. Freddy had never been one to walk away from a mystery, and this one intrigued him. As the house buzzed with whispers of the tragedy, Freddy slipped out of the ballroom and made his way upstairs. He wanted to see the scene for himself. The room was quiet, eerily so, as he stepped inside. The police had already been and gone, but Freddy knew the story had only just begun. The first thing he noticed was the position of the body. Douglas was slumped back in his chair, his head tilted awkwardly, but his expression, Freddy lingered on it, seemed almost surprised. Not the peaceful face one might expect from a man who had decided to end his life. And then there were the shoes too big for him, mismatched with the impeccable outfit he had worn earlier in the evening. Small details, perhaps, but details mattered. The gun lay on the floor, a standard issue revolver, but something about it seemed off too. Freddy bent down, careful not to touch anything. There was no sign of struggle, but the positioning was odd. Why would Douglas shoot himself with the gun in his non-dominant hand? Freddy made a mental note. A left-handed man, shooting with his right? It didn't add up. As Freddy left the room, his mind raced with questions. Why here? Why now? And more importantly, was it really suicide, or had someone wanted it to look that way? The next morning, Freddy found himself drawn back to the scene of the crime, but this time in search of answers. He had questions, many of them, and the first person he needed to speak to was Lady Gertrude McAloon, known to her friends as Gertie. She had been at the ball, and like Freddy, she was suspicious of the events of the previous night. Gertie, always sharp-witted and full of mischief, was already waiting for him at her London flat, her morning tea set out on a delicate china tray. "I knew you'd come, Freddy," she said, her eyes gleaming with curiosity. "Something about it doesn't feel right, does it?" No, Freddy agreed, settling into a chair. It feels staged. Exactly, Gertie replied. But there's more to it. I heard something last night, just before Douglas was found. He was arguing with someone. Not loudly, mind you, but it was heated. I couldn't make out the words, but I'm sure of it. He wasn't alone in that room before it happened. Freddy's interest peaked. Did you see who it was? No, Gertie admitted, leaning back thoughtfully. But I have a hunch it was someone close to him. There were tensions all night, Freddy. You must have seen it. Tatty Nugent, Tom Chetwynd. They were all acting as though they had something to hide. And don't forget, Douglas lost that prize to Nugent Corporation. There's bad blood between the Westrays and the Nugents, no doubt about it. Freddy nodded slowly. Gertie had a way of cutting through the noise, and she was often right. So, you think it wasn't just about the failed engagements or the business? He asked. I think, Gertie said, tapping her chin, that someone wanted him dead. But the why, that's what we need to find out. With Gertie's insight in mind, Freddy began to dig deeper into the events leading up to Douglas's death. His first stop was the Nugent Corporation, where Thomas Chetwynd, Douglas's old friend and now fiancé to Tatty, worked closely with Lord Browncliffe, Tatty's father. Chetwynd had always struck Freddy as the type to smile through gritted teeth, a man who knew how to play both sides of the fence. The office was cold, clinical even, as Freddy was ushered into Chetwynd's corner office. The young man was impeccably dressed, his slick back hair shining under the lights as he rose to greet Freddy. But something about his manner felt off, as if he were trying too hard to appear calm. Mr. Pilkington-Soames, Chetwynd began, forcing a tight-lipped smile. I've been expecting someone like you to come snooping around. I imagine you have questions about Douglas. Freddy nodded. Only a few, for now. What can you tell me about the night of his death? Chetwynd's eyes darkened, but his voice remained measured. A tragedy, of course. I never expected Douglas to end things like that. He was under a lot of pressure, I suppose. 2 engagements gone wrong. The business setbacks, it all added up. You were close to him, Freddy said, watching for any reaction. Chetwynd paused, just for a fraction of a second, before replying. We grew up together. He was a friend, yes, but we hadn't spoken much recently. Things had changed. Freddy leaned forward, sensing that Chetwynd was holding something back. What changed? For the first time, Chetwynd's composure faltered, and he looked away, his fingers drumming against the desk. Douglas was angry about the Nugent deal. He felt we'd stolen that prize from under him. But business is business, Freddy. Surely you understand that. Freddy pressed on. And what about Tatty? She was engaged to him, and now she's engaged to you. That's quite the shift, isn't it? Chetwynd's gaze snapped back to Freddy, his expression hardening. Douglas and Tatty were over long before we got engaged. If you're suggesting there was something more to it, well, you're barking up the wrong tree. Freddy didn't respond immediately, letting the silence hang between them. Chetwynd's defensiveness only confirmed Freddy's suspicions. There was more to this than a simple case of lost love or business rivalry. Something darker was lurking beneath the surface. With more questions than answers, Freddy knew his investigation had only just begun. The next stop was to dig into Douglas's life in the weeks leading up to his death. It didn't take long for Freddy to uncover whispers of sabotage at the Westray manufacturing plant, rumors that a series of mechanical failures in the fighter planes under development weren't just accidents. Douglas had been overseeing the project, and those failures had cost his family dearly. But it seemed that someone had been working against him, deliberately trying to ruin the Westray's reputation. Freddy's gut told him that this was connected to Douglas's death. Someone had wanted to see him fail, and when that wasn't enough, they had resorted to something far more sinister. It wasn't just about business, it was about revenge. As Freddy pieced together the clues, the web of deceit began to unravel. Blackmail, shady deals, and sabotage had all played a part in the tragedy at St. James's. But the final piece of the puzzle came when Freddy uncovered a hidden letter, one written by Douglas just days before his death. In it, Douglas spoke of a betrayal, someone close to him who had turned against him when he needed them most. The letter didn't name names, but it painted a clear picture. Douglas hadn't been planning to take his own life. He had been planning to confront his betrayer. The final confrontation came in the dead of night. Freddy, armed with the truth, faced the murderer, a person who had been hiding in plain sight all along, using their charm and connections to deflect suspicion. The truth, however, could not be buried any longer. In the end, it wasn't suicide that took Douglas Westray's life. It was murder, and the culprit, someone who had much more to gain from Douglas's death than anyone had suspected. In the glittering world of high society, not everything is as it seems. Beneath the surface of wealth and power lies a darkness that few are willing to confront. But for Freddy Pilkington-Soames, the truth was all that mattered. And in the case of Douglas Westray, the truth was as deadly as the bullet that took his life.